I love it. I love that we have the whole family together, the kids and the elementary kids and youth group and everybody in celebrating together. If you have not been to one of our youth services or kids services experiences, I'll tell you what, this happens up front every time they get together. So this is good. I love it. I love the energy and the hope and the passion that's here today. Some of you walked in and go, what did I walk into today, right? We love the fact that we can come to really experience something super. Because as Americans, I'll say this. I think we love the spectacle. And we do. We love spectacular things. And the spectacle of awesomeness is just something that we like. That's why we're drawn to a Super Bowl, some like the World Series or the Oscars or any event where we see people at the epitome of achievement. All right, we see people at the top of their game, and we come together, and it creates debate, doesn't it? It's like one of the easy conversations for a lot of people. It's like, who's the best? Who is the GOAT? Who's the greatest of all time? And you have those conversations for each sport and each dynamic. And if you could pick a team, who would you pick on your team? And would you draft that person? We love seeing people at the highest of their capacity. Putting people at the highest of their capacity. And really we start asking the question, who would you pay, not what would you pay money for, but who would you pay great money to go watch perform? And that tends to drive so much of how our culture reacts and works. And then those that perform at that level, they chase different jobs and contracts and finances until the new young talent comes along and displaces them. And now they're no longer the most talented and somebody else comes in and takes their spot. And one of the things that's true is then that tends to translate into real life, doesn't it? We still live in a culture, we live in the world where people have discussions all the time, who's the best? Who is it that deserves this promotion? Who is it that really is a great dad or a great mom? And who is it that performed well here? Did they deserve what they're getting? Because we look at how we perform and we respond to it. All you have to do is watch how this translates down to the playground, and you know it happens, right? At most playgrounds, you're going to have at some point people picking teams. They're going to choose up teams, and if it's kickball or whatever they're playing, that they're going to choose up sides, and they pick back and forth based upon talent and friends and who they want on their team. As a kid, growing up, the sport of choice for us was kickball in elementary school. That was what we played all the time. And I was one of those kids. I tended to be a little bit bigger, faster, stronger. So I was the kid that always got to pick the teams. It was usually myself or two other guys, and we'd kind of rotate who was picking the teams. And inevitably, we'd get picking the teams, and we'd get down to the end, and it would be the same guy at the end of the list every time. Young guy that just wasn't real athletic and kind of kept to himself, but he always wanted to play. And so he was always the last one picked. In fact, it usually went more like, well, you get him. Right? That's who you get. And I don't remember how it happened, but there was at one point, we were doing this for a while, and one particular day I just decided he wasn't going to be the last one picked that day. And so I picked him partway through, and it just threw everybody off. Like nobody knew what to expect, and somebody else was the last one picked. And he was surprised too. He was just like, I'm used to being the last one picked. And that actually went on. I kind of liked how it responded. I saw him light up a little bit, and he did the next time and just made sure he wasn't the last one picked. And this went to the point where even somebody else at one point picked him before I got to him, just to see, and thinking that maybe he had a skill level that we didn't know about it. And then he got up to kick, and no, he just really was that bad. And I remember one day I was coming in from recess, and my teacher says, "Hey, Brian, I need to talk to you a second." And I don't know about you, but I don't like being called out, right? Because usually at that age and that point in my life, when I was being called out, it was, I know you cheated on that test. I know you broke that window. I know you punched that kid. Like that was the normal conversation when a teacher said, hey, I want to talk to you a second. But this particular day, the teacher pulls me aside and she says, Brian, I've been watching what you've been doing and how you've been picking teams, and I want you to know you're a very kind boy. And she called something out in me that started changing the trajectory of my life. That somebody saw something in me and reinforced it that maybe I didn't always see in myself, but that you're kind. We live in a culture when somebody calls us out, what we normally do, we brace for, all right, here it comes, right? Wife says, hey, we need to talk, or your boss says, hey, we need to talk. Internally, we're ready to get called out. We're ready for somebody to call us out on we're not performing well, we're not living up to expectations, we're not performing, and there's somebody else that's going to overperform more than us and keep us in line, and you don't deserve where you're at, or maybe they're going to take that penalty flag and throw it at us and like, hey, minus 10 yards for you on that one. You can't act that way. You can't do it that way. And we translate this, unfortunately, into our spiritual lives also. When it comes to interacting with God, because there have been many people, and for many of us in our lives, we've had people who say they talk on God's behalf, throw a flag at us. People that say they talk on God's behalf will call us out and say, well, you don't measure up here, and you're not doing it well enough there. You're not achieving what you should be doing. You're not that good. You shouldn't be. You're pretty bad, actually. And we feel not good enough. And there's so many people I talk to when they come to church, they're just like, nah, it's not my thing. And a lot of times what they're saying is, I don't feel like I measure up, and why would I want to have a competitive, so to speak, reaction to church? I got that enough in the rest of my life. But here's the cool thing that we have about the Bible, is we don't just have to rely upon other people to speak on God's behalf. We can actually go to see how God speaks on his own behalf. And when you look at the scripture, you see how God picked his own team, so to speak. If you have your Bibles, I'd love for you to turn to John chapter 1, where we're going to hang out today, or it's on the Bible app. And when Jesus picks his team, we look at the people that Jesus picked, and Jesus picks Matthew, who was a tax collector, who people just didn't like. He was a little bit of a cheat. Thomas, who just struggled with how he believed and what he wanted to see happen. He picked Simon, who was this revolutionary who just wanted to fight and be combative in how he approached things. And Peter is just a kind of a knucklehead of a fisherman, if you're going to put it nicely, when you read about his life. And they're not what we would normally consider first-round draft picks. And in John chapter 1, we start in verse 45. One of the encounters of Jesus is with Nathanael. It starts this way. It says, Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, we have found the very person that Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. Nazareth, explained Nathanael. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Come and see for yourself, Philip replied. And as they approached, Jesus said, now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity. How do you know about me? Nathanael asked. Jesus replied, I could see you under the fig tree before Philip found you. Then Nathanael exclaimed, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. Jesus asked him, do you believe this just because I told you I've seen you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than this. Then he said, I tell you the truth. You will all see heaven open and the angels of God going up and down on the Son of Man, the one who is the stairway between heaven and earth. See, in the beginning of the story, Philip had encountered Jesus, and one of the things that we see about people who actually encounter Jesus, not just heard about him, but people who encounter Jesus, there's something that rises up within them that they have to go tell other people. Because once you truly meet Jesus, he's so remarkable that you have to respond. You want to tell other people about him. And he goes and he tells him, we found him and he's from Nazareth. And Nathanael, if anybody ever blows an interview, it's Nathanael. Right? At this point, he's like, well, what good can come from Nazareth? He lived in that part of Galilee, and he's just kind of saying, well, that town is just awful. It's kind of like if you're interviewing for a job with the Bears, which is the first problem and the step that you're going to take. But you start the interview by just saying, you know what, I really admire the Packers. The Packers are a really great team. That's which is how you should go, right? I mean, it's the wrong way to start the interview. It's kind of like in our community, if there'd be somebody who went to Washington High School and they're like, well, what good can come from Kennedy? Or if somebody at Kennedy going, well, what good could come from Prairie? We have these kind of comparison things that take place. And there's just something that rises up within us. And there's this need as humans within us to do this comparison. Because what comparison does is it elevates us above others. We achieve more. We deserve more. We should be recognized more than the other person. That person doesn't have as much to offer. If you went to that school, that's not as good. But if you went to this school, then you deserve better. But here's the problem with comparison. Comparison always leads to bondage and ultimately to anger. C.S. Lewis talked about this in a beautifully way, profound way. He says, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. It's the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. And once the element of competition is gone, pride is gone. I've been with people of all levels of success that could write different levels of checks, right, out of their checking account. And one of the things I've noticed, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're on the peak of your performance capacity or you're in the middle or on the bottom, that when you end up comparing, there tends to be an inward level of anger that just simmers. Like you get them behind closed doors, and there's just this internal anger that's just always there. At work, there's kind of like this anger that drives and it fuels the competitiveness in a sense that somebody else is not going to get more than me. Somebody else is not going to have more than me. I am not going to let someone else outdo me, outperform me. And if you question me, how dare you question me? Because what you're saying is I don't have enough. And if you tell me I don't have enough, that's when all of a sudden we get in this comparison with other people. We get in comparison with other issues. And what I've noticed is always true. It always comes down to a root of insecurity. That the more that there's anger, the more that you see someone respond with anger in a situation when they're questioned or when somebody else puts them up against somebody else, there's an insecurity internally. Saying that somebody else could outperform me. You think someone else could, you think you could do this better than I could. You think I don't love you. You think I don't respond this way out of kindness and I'm not giving enough of myself. And that internal anger, that internal comparison, that internal pride always leaves us in bondage. It captivates us and it closes us in. So one of the things I've kind of had an issue with coaches over the years, partly because I did years in my college teaching time of doing youth development. And what I've noticed with a lot of coaches, especially in youth leagues and other situations, is we tend to see a lot of people think that challenging their players to do better, that they're going to get the most out of them by comparing them to someone else. By belittling your achievement compared to somebody else's achievement. That the person that's across the way, that they're trying to take something from you, and as a result, you should rise up and be better than them. And all that does is it fuels shame. It fuels and it perpetuates this level of shame and insecurity that we always have to be driven to be better than the other person, as opposed to calling out the best within them. And this shame that's there, and it feeds on they say the mistakes that you have, that's what should motivate your growth. But what's always interesting with a lot of those coaches, as soon as you question their mistakes, oh, heaven forbid, right? Oh, it'll blow up right back at you because how dare you question me? Wait a minute, you're going to question everything I do, but we can't question you. It's like we play this unfair game. And all it does is it perpetuates a culture where we're trying to limit each other, push each other down so we can elevate ourselves. Thomas à Kempis is a brilliant mind from back in the 1400s, and I love his quote that he talks about this because it shows us how little human nature has changed over the centuries. He says, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." There's so many of us that we want to change that inner struggle, that inner turmoil, that sense of, do I measure up? Am I good enough? And things that we'd never admit out loud. Things we only will have that conversation in the quiet places of our hearts and of our minds. And if anyone ever asks us, we'll never have that external conversation. But this anger that's sparked by an inability to change our inner monologue is a real thing that many of us deal with. And when Jesus hears Nathanael kind of just say that's his first response, well, what good can come from Nazareth? Jesus doesn't play into that competitive comparison game. Look what he says in return. Jesus looks at him instead and he says, "Now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity." Here's the thing with Jesus. When Jesus answers us, he doesn't call out what's wrong in you. He only calls out what's good in you. When Jesus starts the conversation, he is looking at you and he's calling out what's good in you. He sees the good in each and every one of us. He sees what the potential that we have. He's our creator. He's the one that's created us. He knows the potential that we have. He knows the ability that we have deep within us that is lying dormant, is not what it's fully supposed to be. And Jesus does this amazing thing and he calls it out. He speaks life into it. You think that this is not just reserved for this. Every first encounter Jesus had with people, he did this. Zacchaeus, who was a cheat and people just didn't like him at all. Jesus' first encounter is, hey, bud, let's go get some dinner. The lepers and people that had communicable diseases that no one else would go around. Jesus goes and his first response was to touch them. You got other leaders that he interacted with. There's a demon-possessed man who everyone was afraid of. They ran away from him on all types of levels. And Jesus walks up to him and comforts him and sends him home. And there's a woman that approaches him at one point, and she approaches and touches him and everybody around her. All those speaking on behalf of God said, if you only knew who this was, you would throw her out. You would not let her near you. You would not let her touch you because and they throw in the flag. They're calling out every bad thing in her. And what does Jesus say? What she has just done will be remembered for eternity. He speaks value into her. He speaks purpose into her. He brings that out in us. And it's the beautiful thing about God is you will never have to compete to get God's attention. When he sees you, he is going to call out the good in you. He's going to see the dormant things that are in you that are beautiful and strong and creative and life-giving, and he's going to speak life into it, and he's going to call it out. In fact, he's going to do more than call out the good in you. He will call out the impossible in you. You look throughout Scripture, and there's people like Peter, who was a knucklehead, right? But Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. You're going to be a foundational pillar point in the church that I'm going to build. Gideon, a young man who was just a coward and afraid and hiding, God shows up to him and says, "Oh, mighty warrior, come on, you got this." Over and over again, God comes to us and he speaks life to us. Nathanael is here in the moment, and God says, here is a true Israelite, a man who has complete integrity. Jesus wasn't talking just about his ethnicity at that point by calling him a true Israelite, even though he was a Jewish man. But Israel, the term Israel, came from a man named Jacob. And Jacob, back in years before, had an encounter with God in which he was wrestling with God. He was so upset that he didn't feel like God was living up to his promises. And he starts wrestling with him, and he wouldn't give up, and he wouldn't give up until God blessed him. And it wasn't until right before the morning hits that God finally blesses him, and he changes his name from Jacob, which means deceiver, to Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. To say that you are wrestling with God was a compliment. See, so many of us think that, well, if I have doubts about God, that God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. God's like, no. You're getting there. Because he wants to have that conversation with you. He wants to have that relationship with you. And he tells him, you are a man of complete integrity. You're not hiding anything. You're bringing your questions forward. You're bringing your life forward. And Nathanael's kind of freaked out. He's like, how do you know? How do you know this about me? Like, you don't know me, like that kind of conversation. You don't know me. But Jesus goes, no, I saw you in your hiding place. I saw you in the place that nobody else knows you go. I saw you in that moment, that spot in your heart that nobody else speaks to, that nobody else knows the conversations that you have with yourself. It's in that moment that I saw you. It's in that moment that he sees us, that he knows us, that he calls us out. Because here's the thing that we have to fully understand. God isn't looking for people who are faultless. He's looking for people who are falseless, who don't hide behind things, but that don't present a false front, They're like, here's who I am. God, here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what it's dealing with. Here's the anger in my life. Here's the shame in my life. Here's the doubt in my life. Here's the frustration in my life. Here's what's always on top of me in my head that I just can't get over. And when we're faultless before God, God goes, that's where I want you to be. And it's in this moment that he pours life and calls out greatness in you. We think we can hide those things, but here's the thing. You can't hide them from God. That's why around here we say often, it is okay to not be okay, right? But God doesn't want to keep you that way. God doesn't want to keep you that way. If we're always hiding those things, we don't get a chance to really let them out and to let them be fulfilled. And what we understand, and what I really hope that you get today, is God isn't looking for a culture or people that are saying, hey, look at how good I am. I'm this much better than everyone else. I rely upon comparison or compare myself with other people. He's looking for people that say, no, here's who I am. And God, you're calling out something great in me. You're calling out something beautiful in me. See, I think this is why we love true sports stories. Most of us like sports stories, but we don't get too caught up in the championship games. We'll forget who wins tonight, and there's a few people that'll worry about. But the sports stories, the true sports stories that move us, that shape us, that bring us to tears at times, are the stories where the true heart of what it's meant to be comes out. Remember the first time I heard the story of Ben Coleman. Ben was twin, he and his brother Alex, they were born, and after he was born, they realized that Ben had some difficulties. In fact, he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and his muscles would atrophy over time. But as he grew up, one of the things about Ben is Ben never wanted to sit on the sidelines, and Ben never wanted to watch other people. Ben wanted to be a part. And his brother was a runner, and he loved to run, but the thing with Ben is when he ran, he always fell. Like, it wasn't a matter of if he would fall, it was when he would fall and how often would he fall. And he'd get cut up and he'd be scraped and it would be a difficult thing, but he'd get back up and he'd be running. And he wanted to be a part of a team, and he didn't want to just be a water boy. He didn't just want to be, someone who sat on the sidelines. He wanted to be a part of the team. And so his parents called up the cross-country coach at the high school and told him about his cerebral palsy and the condition. The coach was one of those great coaches who says, bring him. He can be a part of the team. And he brought him in, and he was a part of the team, and he competed for 4 years with the cross-country team. And where the top athletes would finish the 5K race within about 15 minutes or so, a little over 15 minutes. It would usually take Ben closer to an hour to finish the race. And he would fall so often during the race, he'd be cut up and scraped, and by the time he would get to the end, he'd have to be cleaned up, and they'd bandage him up and deal with all the scrapes and the bruises, but it never discouraged him. In fact, it got to the point where as he was running, the other runners would finish their race ahead of time, and they would then go back and join Ben and run alongside of him to the end, cheering him on. Many races, his brother and his younger sister would take the last 100 yards, and they would be side by side with him, making sure if he fell down, he could get right back up again and working. And the coach said about Ben, they said, he's one of the most competitive kids I've ever met. He said, you have to be competitive when you can't compete against anyone else. You can only compete against yourself. His goal in high school was to finish the race in under 45 minutes. The very last race, it was a championship race for the region, and his team ended up winning that championship. But as he's finishing his portion of it, and everybody else had come back, some teams had left, but the rest of them had come along, and they're coming alongside of him, and they're cheering him on. And his very last race, he broke 45 minutes. And just tears running down, and he's excited that he was able to be a part of this. And when he was interviewed about this race and what it meant and why he wanted to be on the team, he just simply said, I just wanted a place where I belong. And isn't that what all of us want? We just want a place where we belong. Where we belong, where somebody notices us, and that it doesn't matter how we perform or how well we perform, but that we belong and that we're a part and there's good in us, that we cheer on with each other and we call it out of each other. And Jesus lives this way. This is how Jesus interacts with us. In Ephesians 2, starting in verse 8, Paul's writing to a group of people, and he says, it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is a gift of God. not a result of work, so that no one can boast. What grace is grace is this undeserved gift. You don't deserve it. You didn't earn it. You didn't achieve it. You're not better than anyone else, but you are given full rights into it. And that's how Jesus picks his team. That's how Jesus interacts with each and every one of us. It never has to prove yourself or overcome things. All God is saying is quit being false. Quit being false. Quit being fake about who you are and how you've got everything together and how you've got all these things in place. Jesus told Nathanael, dealing with his anger and his responses to other things, I saw you first. Even when no one else could see you, I saw you. We think we got to do something for God to notice us. He notices you first. He notices you in everything. And he sees you and he says, your life has purpose. Your life has meaning. He calls things out of you. He is calling you out, not to scold you, not to throw a flag, not to say penalty. Look at all these things that you've messed up and you didn't measure up here. And this person's so much better than you. So I'm going to use that person instead. Jesus goes, no. I see you for who you are. And I'm calling greatness out of you. I'm calling impossibility out of you. I'm calling fear and failure out of you, that they don't have to control you or hold you back any longer. They should have no control over you, no say in your life. He wants you to be free to be who he's created you to be. One of my favorite coaches of all time is Tony Dungy. And one of the things I love about Tony Dungy, one, he's a man of faith, and God did a profound work in his life when he was a younger man. And as he was rising up the ranks of coaching, he made a decision. He said, I'm going to make sure that I want to do it the right way. While other coaches are good at cussing guys out and shaming them and putting them in their place, he goes, I just won't coach that way. I'm going to coach by calling greatness out of them, by doing things the right way and helping people have accountability for themselves to see the greatness for the team, that we appreciate each other. And so when he was being interviewed for his first head coaching job, he didn't think he would get it at all because that's not the world in which he lived. But when he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're like, nope, we believe in you. We think that you're the guy. And so they hire him to be the head coach. And 6 years in, they had a great winning record. They did well as a team, but they never made it to the Super Bowl. And so they fired him. He says as he was interviewed at that time, he kind of thought, well, maybe that's the end of my football journey. There really isn't a group that wants to do this the right way. And so he thought about just getting a job in Tampa Bay, just saying, I'll find a job and we'll just keep going from here. And then the owner of the Indianapolis Colts calls him up, says, I like the way that you do things. We want to do things the right way. Will you come be our coach? And so Tony goes to Indianapolis and he starts coaching that way. And I have a friend of mine that I've met over the years and we've got to know each other, and he played for him with the Colts for those many years. The first time we had lunch together, I remember looking down at his hand. I'm like, that's a big ring. I had no idea. Oh, it's a Super Bowl ring. It's like one of those kind of, okay, that explains it. I just thought he had his high school class ring on. I had no idea. But he said one of the things about playing for Coach Dungy, he says he just brought the best out of everyone. That every one of us wanted to give the best for him. They wanted to give down and dig deep to give for him because they honored him as a man. They honored him and respected him for who he was. And Coach Dungy said that every decision he made, he wanted to make through the lens of Jesus Christ. And when they worked one of the years as he was coaching, they had the Colts, they had Peyton Manning, and they thought this was the team. They had no flaws in their team. Every area of the game, they were covered, they were great. And they thought this was our year to win the Super Bowl. And that was the year that the Pittsburgh Steelers beat them in the playoffs. He says, I remember thinking this might not ever happen. If we can't get there with this team, I might not ever win the Super Bowl. And I have to be okay with that. Because I've told all these young men all along, don't let football be your life. Don't let it consume you. He goes, I've seen too many gain the whole world and lose their soul. He goes, I had to live by that myself. And then the next year they played again, and that was the year that they made it to the Super Bowl and they won it all. And as they won it all, at the end of the Super Bowl, the celebration begins, and it's a party and it's chaos, and they bring the trophies out and all those things. And the players went to Coach Dungy and they said, Coach, we have been doing it the right way all along. We're going to end this way, the way we end every game. Coach, we got to end this game the way we run every game. Whether we win or lose, we always do it the same. Coach, we need to pray. And so in the locker room, in the midst of all the chaos, they asked everyone to step out that wasn't part of the team, or if they're part of the media, to turn their cameras off and respect this moment, because this is how they played the game and this is what they did right. And there was one photographer that didn't abide by that rule, and he took this particular picture of a group of men afterwards on their knees, thanking Jesus for giving them hope, for seeing something great in them, for having a team that they could care for each other and love each other and bring out greatness in each other. That's why today I want to start a new sport. I want to start a sport that we play every day, and that's a sport where we call out greatness in each other. Where we quit calling out where we don't measure up and throwing the penalty flags on people. But every time we encounter somebody, we see greatness in them and we call goodness out of them. We call beauty out of them. We call peace out of them. We call strength out of them. We call resolve out of them, that they will not give up, that they will not bow down, that they will not let anger or other things simmer underneath, worry that somebody else might outperform. But they would stand up and know that there's a creator who sees beauty in them, that there's a God who sees something amazing in them, that we would quit speaking on God's behalf and throwing flags at people, but that we would know that God is looking at each of us and saying, I want you on my team. You are on my team. I get to pick, and I pick you because of who you are, because of what's within you, because of who he wants you to be. We've got to understand the world we live in is tight and rigid and throws flags all the time. And so many people have said, no, that's how the church is. The church is tight and rigid and throws flags on people. It is time for the church to stand up and for us to understand that God sees greatness in us. God sees beauty in us. God sees goodness in us. And we don't have to call out the bad pieces in each of us, but there's grace that overwhelms everything. If you've ever been to a Little League game, that you know that Little League games are just awesome. There's one particular writer, and I could relate it to this game in many different ways, but he was at a game and watching, and it was one of those games where it came down to the ninth inning. They played the full game in this particular league, and it was just one run separating. So the home team's up to bat, they're down by one run. The bases are loaded, there's 2 outs, and a kid named Carl is up to bat. And he knew his name was Carl because Carl's entire family was there. His mom, dad, grandparents, and aunts and uncles. Just seems like everyone was there, and they're cheering him on. They're like, come on, Carl, you can do this. You got this, Carl. And Carl gets up to the plate, and just with all the nerves that are in that moment, the moment that all of us dream for, and he's got this whole family cheering him on, and boom, first swing, strike 1. Gets up, swings again, strike 2. Third pitch, ball, everyone cheers, good eye. Fourth pitch, another ball. Fifth pitch comes, and he swings with all he's got. Strike 3, game's over. The other team goes crazy. They're just jumping up and down and running to get their juice boxes and their little fruit snacks. And the other team that lost, they're kind of to go get their juice boxes and fruit snacks, and they're all just walking away. But they noticed that standing at home plate, Carl was still standing there. Head down, hadn't moved. Holding onto the bat. For moments, he was just by himself. All of a sudden, Carl hears a whisper behind him. Hey, Carl, get ready. Here comes the pitch. Dad had come in and was playing catcher. On the pitcher's mound stood Grandpa holding the ball. At first base was Mom. Second base was his uncle. Third base was an aunt. And left field's another aunt and a cousin. And they're all going, come on, Carl, you got this, you got this. And Grandpa gets up and he throws the first pitch, and Carl swings and misses everything. Second pitch, still nothing. Third pitch, nothing. Fourth, fifth, sixth. About the ninth pitch, he finally gets a hold of it, and he just drives this thing into shallow left field. It's a good hit, but went right to one of the relatives, and so they pick it up, and they're throwing it over to first base, and they would have had him by a mile. But it's amazing how the sun just got in mom's eyes, and she couldn't see it, and she misses the ball, and it goes past, and so she picks it up and is thrown over to second base, and I had no idea how the angles and trajectory work, but the sun got in the eyes of the second baseman too from the other direction, and he misses the ball, and it goes through, and he runs to third. Come on, Carl. And he goes to third, and he's coming into home, and here comes the throw into home to dad at the catcher, and he's got the plate blocked, and he's like, you're not getting in, and it hits the glove, and all of a sudden it pops out of his glove, and Carl slides in, and home run, and everyone just goes ballistic, and Carl's cheering, and they're carrying him around. And the author of the story says he went to one of the family members and he says, I think I just witnessed a conspiracy of grace. That's what God does with us every day. God lives with us as the conspiracy of grace every day. Man, we're here today, and I want just to remind you on this day that even though we live in a culture that celebrates performance, that elevates people that have higher capacity than others and tends to lessen those that is not the way God operates. God operates in a way where he looks at us and he doesn't put comparison, and he doesn't allow pride, and he doesn't allow anger. He sees the good in us, and he calls out the good in us, and he speaks life to us, and he wants us to be falseless, to take away the masks, to take away all these things that we feel like we have to put up in order to achieve, in order to be ahead of other people. That grace that God offers, when he went to the cross, it's the opposite of rules. It's the opposite of putting limits. He says, no, I will die for you because I want you to have life to the fullest. And that's the call that God has on each and every one of us today, that he is calling you out. And if there's anything I can do today, and what I'd love to do, and what I love as pastors, I'm calling you out today. Every one of you. I'm calling you out of your insecurities. I'm going to call you out of the falseness that's there. I'm going to call you out and say, there is more in you than you realize. There is things that God has placed you in your workplace for a purpose. He's placed you in your families for a purpose. Don't you dare let anything else limit that capacity. He is calling you out, and I'm calling you out today to say that God has got something amazing in your life. Don't you dare limit it. I love it if we all just bow our heads and close our eyes for a moment. God, as we've come together in this place today, we love that we can celebrate. There's goodness, and there's hope, and there's love, and there's peace, and there's joy abounding. And you're the one that starts it all. The reason we can celebrate like this is because we don't have to worry about putting on airs or trying to outperform or do things. We just get to be with you, and that you see us, and that you know us in our hidden places. God, you know us in those spots in our heart that nobody else knows of, nobody else understands, but you know. And you see those, and you call greatness out of us. And God, I pray for every man, every woman, every young person that's here today, Lord, that they would know that this isn't just a simple game. That's not a ritual. It's not religion. But that when we meet you and when we encounter you, everything changes. Everything changes. And so if you're here today, and maybe today is one of those days that you've even felt like over the time, I'm a Christian, I think, I kind of believe, and I've gone to church, and I don't doubt, or I'm not a bad person. But maybe today you're starting to realize, but I've been false. And the repentance that God asks us to do is simply admitting that I've been false. That on my own, I can't produce life. On my own, I can't make things happen. That if I can put myself in comparison with others, there's always going to be somebody else that outperforms me. But I repent, I turn from that, and I say, Jesus, I don't need that. I just need your life. I lay down my life and I pick up yours. It's why he went to the cross for you. It's why he gave his life for you. He came to bring you life, to bring you hope. And if today's a day where that's starting to make sense, there's something resolved within you saying, you know what, I want God to call me out. He's speaking, and that you feel that nudging in your heart. That's him speaking to you in your quiet place, in that secret place that nobody else knows about. I would love it if you just say a simple prayer like this with me. In fact, why don't we all just pray this prayer together? Just say, Dear Jesus, I'm amazed that you know everything about me. You know the secrets. You know the things I keep hidden, even from myself, because I don't want to admit when I'm wrong. But you see that, and you call me out anyway. And you call out goodness, and you call out love. And for that reason today, I want to lay my life down, and I choose you. I choose you. Thank you for bringing life to me and not making me meet some unattainable standard. Thanks for changing me.